presenting the TD Ameritrade Network. I'm Tom White, joined by my co-host Kevin Hinks. So let's bring in our next guest for our cash tag segment. That's going to be Megan Brantley, the Vice President of Research at LikeFolio. Thanks for being here today, Megan.
Yeah, thanks for having me, guys.
All right, it's good to see you as opposed to Landon and Andy. We've been talking to those guys all week, so this is a little refresh for us. So we're talking block/square, whatever you want to call it. Stock's down about 56% so far this year, far off of those all-time highs that we saw last August. But Megan, according to your data, when you're looking at this type of stock, you know, it's based on the Cash App, right? They've got a good customer base built into this, but now you've got the CEO trying to pivot and turn it into a crypto-based firm. But at the same time, they've got that legacy business that's pretty positive for that company to allow them to explore that side of it. Are you seeing any positive data on what they already have out there?
Yeah, so I think today, you know, is a really tough day to come in and bring something with you guys in terms of positive data, but Square is one of those examples of a company that we see actual traction with consumers. So whenever we listen to mentions from consumers who are talking about using Cash App, which is obviously probably the most consumer-facing portion of their business, but we're also listening for those Square, those seller ecosystem mentions as well. And we're starting to see some signs of a divergence here, which is something that we always like to key in on. And what we mean is that, you know, we see consumer usage and download mentions rising on a year-over-year basis. I think those have increased by about 45% year-over-year in terms of just adoption of Square products and services. And you can see the share price heading in the opposite direction. And whenever we start to see that, this is one of those names where we start to look and say, okay, you know, demand looks pretty healthy for this company. After some timbering in 2021, we're starting to see some positive momentum out of Square. And in the meantime, we think that the market has completely written this name off. And so this is one, you know, as we start to analyze potential opportunities long-term in environments like this, this is one that's definitely catching our eye.
Megan, this company was so attractive when it started out as a, you know, almost an infrastructure company. They sold things that you could swipe your card, right? Square. It was how small businesses could really enhance their business. And then they got into the Cash App, which was payments, which was enormously popular and still is. That's where they get most of their revenue, from those two, Square and Cash App. But the problem is that third one that they got into, which is Bitcoin, and the fact that they've changed their name to Block. And no matter how positive this company is in terms of the things they're doing, which I believe it is, if you look on my Thinkorswim platform, guys, I overlaid a chart of Bitcoin on top of Block. And guess what? It's highly correlated to Bitcoin. Whether it should be or not, whether it wants to be or not, it is correlated to that. So even if they come out with good news, it's more tied to the price of Bitcoin, almost like an underlying and a future would be tied. But that's, I think, part of the problem. Are you seeing anything, any correlation to mentions about Bitcoin to mentions about Block? Because the chart says that these two, no matter what this business is doing in hardware and in Cash App, this stock looks tied to Bitcoin, Megan.
Yeah, you know, I think that this is part of, you know, its leader's mission, you know, this belief in Bitcoin, this belief in decentralized finance. And this is definitely an element to be aware of whenever we look at Square, and I think that, or Block. And I think that's what, whenever we look at some major trends, you know, previously this attachment to Bitcoin and this attachment to cryptocurrency served as a major tailwind. And now we're starting to see that be a bit of a headwind. So that's definitely something to keep in mind. But as you mentioned, the major parts of this business are its Cash App and its seller ecosystem, and now even this buy now, pay later element that they just integrated with the acquisition of Afterpay. And we see those trends really growing tremendously on a year-over-year basis. So the, you know, adoption of digital wallet services, adoption of contactless payments, which is another, you know, addition. I know that earlier this week they announced integrations with Apple's Tap to Pay, so that you'll be able to, a seller can take a payment from you just with tapping your phone, which I think is a huge step in terms of adoption of this seller ecosystem as well. So I think that Square definitely has a lot of positive things going for it. And should the tide shift in terms of cryptocurrency, that could once again, on the flip side, be a major tailwind for the company. But right now, it's certainly a headwind in the near term.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that gets overlooked, Megan, is the buy now, pay later aspect of their business. They acquired Afterpay. This is getting a lot of headlines just because this week at the Worldwide Developer Conference, Apple mentioned that they're going to be getting into this side of the business that's drawing down Affirm Holdings, which has already been hammered a little bit. But then you've got these articles that are saying, hey, late payments on this buy now, pay later are starting to ramp up exponentially, with the inflationary pressure on the consumer. Is this an area that you guys have data on, that the buy now, pay later is positive, but at the same time, this could incur some losses because I'm just not seeing how, when somebody stops paying or they pay late, how they're going to create revenue or margins on that type of business.
So we know that, at least for the consumer, this buy now, pay later adoption rate is rocketing. I think those mentions are now at all-time highs. We see mentions from consumers, utilizing this service up about 97% year over year. But, you do make an interesting point that whenever we look at people who are talking about falling behind on payments, those are also rising, not necessarily just for buy now, pay later. To be clear, this is just across the board. We're starting to see the consumer get a little bit stretched. I think Afterpay, though, it put out some interesting stats over the last year talking about how 90% of the Afterpay consumers are actually attached and using debit, and that 95% of these installments are paid on time. So I think that paints probably a better picture than we may initially think of whenever we think of these buy now, pay later services, but it's definitely something to be aware of in the near term if the consumer wallet continues to be squeezed.
Now, Megan, they don't have earnings until like the end of July, early August, but if you guys had a score from LikeFolio on this, what would it be?
So whenever we look at this, we kind of broke this one down into, I would say, a short-term signal and a long-term signal. We actually do have, these two different types of signals that we can look at. I would say earnings signal is a little bit more short-term. If that were this week, it would be in the -20s, so just slightly bearish. But then from a long-term momentum perspective, which is really looking out bigger picture, we have it at a +62. So I think that this is an interesting scenario where short-term, we definitely expect some near-term volatility, but long-term, in terms of overall levels of consumer happiness and adoption of Square products, we do see positive data.
Oh, I like that breakdown of the near term and long term, because definitely some market volatility here might still pressure the stock, but you guys like it long term. All right, great stuff as always, Megan. Appreciate it. Have a great weekend.
Thanks, guys. You too. Happy Friday.
Oh, happy Friday, Megan. That's Megan Brantley, Vice President of Research at LikeFolio, breaking down the data for us.